NATO disaster. An 85-millimeter rail gap stalled the tanks. One hypersonic strike liquefied the convoy. The shield is shattered.
January 18th, 2026, 4:12 a.m. Mockava Transshipment Terminal, Lithuania. The air temperature is minus 12 degrees Celsius, but the wind chill coming off the Baltic plains makes it feel like it could freeze the marrow in your bones. It is a quiet place, industrial, a graveyard of steel and timber. The only sound is the rhythmic mechanical thrum of idling diesel engines and the screech of cold metal on cold metal. If you were standing there, on the frozen gravel, you wouldn't feel like you were at the center of the world. You'd feel like you were in the middle of nowhere, just a bleak rail yard near the Polish border. But geography is a cruel mistress. In the calculus of modern war, this obscure web of tracks is the most dangerous place on Earth. It's dark. The floodlights cast long, jagged shadows across the snow. And sitting there, motionless, is the target. The Iron Spear Convoy. Flatbed wagons carrying the most advanced armored fighting vehicles in the European arsenal, the Leopard 2 A8 main battle tank. 64 tons of composite armor, tungsten, and high-grade optics. A machine built to dominate the plains of Eastern Europe. But right now, it is not a predator. It is cargo. And it is stopped. Not because of enemy fire, not because of a breakdown. It is stopped because of a tape measure, a legacy of an empire that died over a century ago. You see, the tracks here in Lithuania are 1,520 millimeters wide. The Russian gauge, laid down by the Tsars, to stop German armies from rolling east. But the tracks coming from Poland, from the west, are 1,435 millimeters. The standard gauge, 85 millimeters. That is the difference. A gap roughly the width of your hand. But that tiny gap breaks the logistical spine of NATO. It forces the train to stop. It forces the cranes to move. It forces the bogey exchange. A slow, grinding, hours-long process where the entire train must be lifted, or the cargo transferred. For a strategist looking at a map, it's a delay. For a targeting officer looking at a satellite feed, it is a gift. The convoy is static. The heat signatures are blooming against the cold background. It is a sitting duck in a barrel made of frozen iron. To understand why this moment matters, you have to pull back. Way back. Look at the map of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They are an island of NATO territory, surrounded by a sea of Russian influence. To the east, Belarus. To the west, the fortress of Kaliningrad. And connecting them to the rest of the alliance is a single narrow strip of land, the Suwałki Gap. 65 kilometers of rolling hills and farmland. Military planners call it the Achilles heel of the eastern flank. If this corridor closes, the Baltics are cut off. They become West Berlin in the Cold War, isolated, surrounded, indefensible. For years, the alliance has worried about tanks rolling across this gap. They worried about a ground invasion. They dug trenches. They staged war games. But war evolves. The threat isn't a T-90 tank pushing through the mud anymore. It isn't a soldier with a rifle. The threat is physics. It is the ability to project violence over hundreds of kilometers in a matter of minutes. The failure here wasn't just the terrain, it was the infrastructure. The Rail Baltica project, the high-speed line meant to fix that gauge problem, was supposed to be finished. It wasn't. Political delays, budget cuts, not a priority. So, on this Tuesday morning, the Leopard tanks are sitting at Mockava, waiting for the cranes to finish their work. The crew is inside the station, drinking coffee, waiting for the shift change. They believe they are safe. They are kilometers behind the theoretical front line. They are under the umbrella of the most advanced air defense system in the world. They trust the shield, but the math of the battlefield has changed. The shield has a hole, and the hammer is already in the air. Let's talk about that hammer. 400 kilometers to the east, climbing through the stratosphere at the edge of space, is a Mikoyan MiG 31K. NATO calls it Foxhound. It is not a fighter jet in the traditional sense. It is essentially a manned first-stage booster with legs, a massive twin-turbine brick of titanium designed for one thing: raw speed. It is screaming at Mach 2.8, nearly 3,000 kilometers per hour. Under its belly hangs a weapon that looks less like a missile and more like a telephone pole strapped to a jet. The Kh-47M2 Kinzhal, the Dagger. This is not a cruise missile. A cruise missile is a small plane. It flies flies slow, it hits the ground, and thinks. The Kinzhal is a brute. It is an aero-ballistic missile. It is essentially a ground-based rocket that they figured out how to drop from a plane. Why drop it from a plane? Physics. If you launch a rocket from the ground, it has to fight through the thick, soup-like air of the lower atmosphere. It wastes half its fuel just trying to get off the deck, but the MiG-31K acts as a first stage. It carries the weapon up to 20,000 meters. The air up there is thin, almost non-existent, and it accelerates the missile to Mach 3 before the motor even lights. It's like throwing a spear while sprinting. You give it a kinetic head start. The pilot pulls the stick back. The loft maneuver. The jet climbs sharply. The clamps release. The missile falls away, shedding its tail's howling. Then, ignition. The solid fuel motor kicks in with the violence of a controlled explosion. In seconds, it pushes the weapon past Mach 4, then Mach 6, then Mach 8. At these speeds, the air itself becomes the enemy. The friction is so intense that the nitrogen and oxygen molecules in front of the nose cone start to rip apart. They dissociate. They lose their electrons. The air stops being gas and becomes plasma, a superheated ionized sheath of fourth-state matter wrapped around the missile. This plasma does two things. First, it glows. If you were close enough, you wouldn't see a metal missile. You'd see a streaking meteor, a tear in the sky burning at 2,000 degrees Kelvin. Second, it absorbs radio waves. It creates a blackout. The missile effectively hides inside its own shockwave, invisible to some radar frequencies, deaf to GPS signals. It is a blind, deaf, screaming bullet, guided only by its internal inertia, falling towards the rail yard. Now, look at the ground. Standing guard over the Suwałki rail corridor is the Patriot battery, the gold standard of Western air defense, the PAC-3 MSE. These are hit-to-kill interceptors. They don't have explosive warheads. They don't use shrapnel. They are kinetic bullets designed to slam into the enemy missile body to body, hitting a bullet with a bullet. The operators in the Engagement Control Station, the ECS, are looking at their screens. They are highly trained. They are alert. The AN/MPQ-65 radar is radiating, scanning the sky with a phased array of electronic eyes. But this radar has a physical limitation, a geometric flaw. It is a sector scan radar. It looks forward. It covers a fan-shaped wedge of the sky, about 120 degrees wide. It does not spin. It stares. This creates a blind spot, a zone directly above and behind the radar called the cone of silence. If a target flies too high, too steep, it passes out of the radar's field of view. It vanishes. The computer loses the track file, and the Patriot system is designed with a fail-safe. If it can't track the target, it won't launch the interceptor. It won't fire a $1 million missile at a ghost. The Kinzhal is executing a terminal dive. It isn't coming in flat on the horizon like a cruise missile. It is plunging from the mesosphere, coming down almost vertically, an 80-degree dive angle. It is aiming for the gap in the shield. The operators see the blip. They hear the alarm. Vampire! Vampire! The system classifies it. TBM, Tactical Ballistic Missile. Speed, hypersonic, but the angle is too steep. The track is climbing higher on the scope, pushing the limits of the radar's elevation. The computer is trying to calculate an intercept solution, but the geometry is collapsing. The target is entering the dead zone. The operators are watching the math turn against them in real time. They are watching the probability of kill drop from 90% to 50 to 0. Let's pause the clock right here. The missile is seconds away. The defense is blind. Why is this happening? It comes down to a fundamental clash of energy systems. We need to understand what we are dealing with. We are talking about kinetic energy, the energy of motion. The formula is simple: 1/2 mass times velocity squared. That squared part is the killer. If you double the weight of a bullet, you double the energy. But if you double the speed, you quadruple the energy. The Kinzhal weighs about 1,500 kilograms at impact. That's the weight of a Honda Civic. But it is moving at Mach 4, about 1,360 meters per second. When you crunch the numbers, the energy at impact is approximately 1.39 gigajoules. Gigajoules. That is an abstract number. Let's make it real. A modern tank gun, the 120mm cannon on the Leopard 2, fires a dart that hits with about 15 megajoules of energy. That's enough to punch through 2 feet of steel. The Kinzhal is hitting with 100 times that energy. 100 times. At that energy level, materials stop acting like solids. Steel doesn't bend, it flows. It behaves like a liquid. This is the hydrodynamic limit. When the missile strikes the tank, it won't just penetrate the armor, it will splash through it. The armor plates, the engine block, the chassis, they will effectively liquefy under the stress of the impact. The shockwave alone, without any explosives, would be enough to turn the tank into shrapnel. But the Kinzhal also carries a 480 kilogram high explosive warhead. So you have the kinetic impact of a meteorite followed instantly by the detonation of a half-ton bomb. Inside, the confined space of a rail yard, surrounded by other tanks, fuel cars, and ammunition. This isn't just a hit. It is an erasure. The physics of the impact guarantee that anything within a 50-meter radius ceases to exist as a recognizable object. This is the equation of modern defeat. It isn't about bravery. It isn't about morale. It is about a radar that can't look up fast enough, a train that can't move fast enough, and a missile that moves so fast it turns the air into fire. The trap is set, the variables are locked, and the sky is falling. Inside the engagement control station of the Patriot battery, the atmosphere is brittle. It smells of ozone and stale recycled air. This is a small, cramped box, humming with the noise of cooling fans and server racks. The tactical control officer, the TCO, is staring at the scope. His pupils are dilated. His heart rate is climbing past 120 beats per minute. On the screen, the track is a red diamond. It is moving, impossibly fast. The numbers in the sidebar are blurring. Altitude dropping, speed Mach 4.5, range closing. The system is screaming. The digital voice warning system announces priority status, is audible in his headset. TBM detected. TBM detected. His finger hovers over the engage switch. He is trained to trust the system. The Patriot is a robot. It calculates the intercept better than any human brain. He waits for the shoot cue. He waits for the green light that tells him the PAC-3 interceptor has a solution. But the light doesn't come. Instead, a different message flashes on the weapon control computer. Two words that stop his heart. Bird negate. Bird negate. It means the system refuses to fire. It means the computer has run the simulation 1,000 times in a microsecond and determined that the intercept is mathematically impossible. Why? Because of the angle. The Kinzhal is diving from 85 degrees. It is passing directly overhead. It is entering the cone of silence, the blind spot funnel directly above the radar array. The radar is a flat panel. It looks forward, not up. To hit this target, the interceptor would have to launch, pull a 180-degree turn immediately after clearing the tube, and chase the missile from behind. The physics don't work. The interceptor would bleed all its energy in the turn. It would never achieve kinematic intercept of the TBM. The TCO slams his hand on the console. Track lost. The diamond on the screen freezes, then fades. The radar has lost the lock. The missile is no longer a digital signature. It is a physical object falling through the roof of the world, unstopped, unchallenged. The battery is silent. The launchers do not elevate. The tubes do not open. They are watching their own death, and the machine will not let them fight back. Outside at the rail yard, the air is still. The crane operator is lowering a chain onto the front chassis of the lead Leopard tank. He pauses. He sees a flash. High above, the Kinzhal pierces the cloud layer. The plasma sheath around it is glowing white-hot, stripping the electrons from the air, creating a tunnel of ionized gas. It is moving at 1,360 meters per second. That is 4 times the speed of sound. This means it outruns its own noise. On the ground, there is no scream of a jet engine. There is no whistle of a falling bomb. There is only silence. The crane operator sees the light, but he hears nothing. The death arrives before the warning. Impact. The tip of the missile, a solid nose cone of heat-resistant composite, strikes the roof of the Leopard 2A8. The tank is built to survive hits from the front, where the armor is thickest. But the roof is thin, 70 millimeters of steel. At Mach 4, steel does not act like steel. It acts like water. The missile doesn't crunch the armor, it splashes through it. The hydrodynamic limit is breached. The kinetic penetrator passes through the turret roof, through the commander's station, through the basket floor, and into the chassis. In that fraction of a microsecond, before the warhead even detonates, the energy transfer is catastrophic. 1.4 gigajoules of energy are dumped into the 60-ton vehicle instantly. The chassis buckles. The track links undergo brittle fracture and shatter instantly. The suspension arms are sheared off by the sheer force of the shock wave traveling through the metal frame. Then the fuse triggers. 480 kilograms of high explosive detonate inside the hull. The pressure wave has nowhere to go. It is a confined blast. The overpressure liquefies everything inside the crew compartment. The ammunition storage, the blowout panels, don't matter anymore. The tank doesn't just explode, it disintegrates. The turret, weighing 20 tons, is ripped from the hull and thrown 50 meters into the air, spinning like a coin. The shockwave expands, outward. It hits the rail cars. The flatbeds twist into corkscrews. The locomotive, a 100-ton diesel beast, is derailed, lifted off the tracks, and slammed onto its side. The concrete platform of the station cracks, turning into a crater 10 meters deep. Then, and only then, does the sound arrive. The sonic boom. A double crack N-wave that shatters windows 5 kilometers away in the village of Mockava. Followed immediately by the roar of the explosion. The earth heaves. A mushroom cloud of black diesel smoke and burning composite armor rises into the freezing winter sky. The iron spear is broken. But here is the twist. The tragedy isn't just the loss of the tanks. We can build more tanks. Germany has factories. Steel is cheap. The real tragedy is the rail line itself. When the smoke clears, the satellite assessment comes in. The crater has severed the tracks, but it has done something worse. It has destroyed the gauge changer mechanism, the specialized infrastructure needed to switch trains from the European standard gauge to the Russian broad gauge. This was the choke point, the bottleneck. By destroying this specific yard, the enemy hasn't just destroyed a convoy. They have severed the artery. No heavy equipment can move by rail into the Baltic states for months. The Suwałki Gap is effectively closed to logistics. The millions of tons of NATO armor sitting in Poland are now stranded. They can't cross the border without offloading and driving on roads that will crumble under their weight. The Russians didn't need to invade the gap. They just needed to break the tracks. It was a mission kill on an entire country's defense plan. The aftermath is a sobering spreadsheet of loss. Financial cost of the missile, roughly $10 million. Financial cost of the target, 4 Leopard 2A8 tanks at $30 million each. That is $120 million, plus the locomotive, plus the infrastructure. The exchange ratio is 12-1 in the sole favor of the attacker. But the strategic cost is incalculable. In the briefing rooms in Brussels and Washington, the mood is grim. The aegis of air defense has been pierced. The realization sets in. The Patriot radar, designed in the 1980s, has a blind spot that modern physics can exploit. The cone of silence is no longer a theoretical risk. It is a graveyard. The forensic teams will find shards of the missile scattered across the Lithuanian snow. They will find the serial numbers. They will trace the guidance chips, but it won't matter. The message has been sent. The era of static logistics is over. If you stop, you die. If you rely on a single rail line, you are vulnerable. So, here's the verdict. This wasn't a failure of the tank. The Leopard did exactly what it was built to do. It just never got the chance to fight. This was a failure of geometry. We built a shield that looks forward, and the enemy learned to attack from above. The question is, if you were the commander of that battery, what would you have done? You knew the blind spot existed, but you had to cover the front. You had to protect the gap. You were checkmated before the missile even launched. War is not just about who has the bigger gun. It's about who understands the math better. And today, the math won. The board is set. The pieces are reset. But the next missile is already in the tube. Your move, Commander.